And what kind of extra effort are you seeing the best marketers and best reps put into their work?
I think the people that really differentiate are doing personalized communications now. The individuals, dozen a day that I get in outreach that I've ever replied to, it was a highly personalized message that was about me. Personalized as in, hey, I've looked at G2, I understand what you are focused on, or at least from the outside, I believe I know what you're focused on. And here is an idea that we had of how we can help you with your go-to-market.
You've seen it before. The marketing team tests, researches, and creates new pitches and decks and supporting materials for the sales team. And the sales team looks at it and says, this doesn't sound right. And they pull 2 slides out of the 37-slide deck, and they go back to the old messaging. Sales and marketing teams are working toward the same goal, revenue. But they often work against each other to get there. In this episode, marketer turned CRO Mike Weir of G2 is here to dive into how to unlock your revenue team by bringing data and structure to your revenue-critical employees. Mike has a rich background leading marketing at massive companies like LinkedIn and CDW, and is currently CRO at G2, having led the revenue team through a record-setting 2021, a massive $157 million Series D round at a valuation of $1.1 billion, with a B, dollars, and another year of growth in 2022, despite the economic headwinds. So let's dive in with Mike and Kyle, and make sure that you download the checklist for tips on building cadences for all your revenue-critical employees.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Mike Weir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Likewise, I'm going to start with a little bit of a bio blast, take people back in time, a trip down memory lane here. You are, I believe, a marketer in salesperson's clothing. So I want to explore that a little bit here. Take you back to 2005 through 2012. You were the head of data center solutions marketing at CDW. In 2012, you jump over to LinkedIn and you become the global head of category development at LinkedIn from 2012 to 2020 until you jump over to G2 as the CRO now in 2020. So talk to us a little bit about the journey, and specifically, maybe this is selfishly motivated, how did you make the jump from marketing to sales?
Yeah, I think it was a very purposeful change. I grew up as a marketer. I've always been at tech companies, been in the tech industry for 20 plus years, and loved marketing. As I was a marketer, I always thought, man, I'm going to be a CMO someday. It's going to be fantastic. But after having run marketing for different divisions within CDW government, CDW, and then taking on and building out the solutions marketing team, I realized I need to learn sales better. I need to sit in those shoes. I need to get that so that I can be a better, stronger CMO in the future. An amazing opportunity came up with LinkedIn where they were verticalizing and building out a segmentation strategy, which aligned to stuff I'd been doing. And so the move over was, classic LinkedIn. Through somebody in my network, got an intro, had some really exciting conversations, and said, being on the sales side is something I've wanted to do. This feels like a great fit. And so moving into a sales role was a lot of fun. It made me realize some of the things I was doing in marketing and why it made the sales team upset and why we were actually taking a little bit more credit than we should have for some of the pipeline generation or the deals. So now that I'm on the other side, I can look both ways and see, oh man, this is how we can partner better. And I don't want to make those mistakes. I don't want to miss out on the things that I've learned.
So what were some of the things that you were doing as a marketer that were upsetting your sales team?
Yeah, I think that lead generation was a newer thing for CDW. And it was something that we didn't necessarily have a lot of people to execute against. And so we were falling in some cases, to the typical thing of hey, we're generating all those great leads. We're super excited about it. We've got tons of qualification into it. And it's why aren't you using them? Why are 50% of these leads going untouched for 2 weeks? It's this is unacceptable. The faster we get back to them, the more likely they are to take a meeting, the more likely they are to actually consider buying something from us. And I think one of the biggest things, I actually wrote a post about this on LinkedIn about a decade ago, was sales saturation was a thing that wasn't even on my radar. And to me, sales saturation was like, hey, I'm throwing so many leads at the same people. They just physically don't have the time to engage with them. And not being in the sales side of the house and not connecting the dots about how much time it takes just to do the normal customer engagement, the normal prospect outreach. At the time, we weren't really thinking about the fact that it took 7 points of outreach to get somebody to respond to you. And then it took like 2 to 3 times of scheduling the meeting to actually get it to happen. Now, if I'm throwing 10, 20, 30 leads at you, and you're already working 20 other leads, and you're already working other opportunities you've generated for yourself, they were totally underwater. And it just didn't dawn on us at the time. And nobody verbalized it other than they're like, I don't need these leads. And you're like, well, come on. Right. These are great leads. Like, These are Glenn Ross leads. Like, why are we not closing them out here?
That's exactly right. And meanwhile, the salespeople are like, you may as well just hand me a phone book, open up to a random page and tell me to call down. Like, that's not how this stuff works. I want to rise up a little bit here, Mike, and talk more about the category development role that you had at LinkedIn, because I think a lot of people, category design, category development, category creation, these things are gaining in the popular culture. And a lot of people think of it as a marketing exercise. I suspect that you think of it as a company strategy that has a huge impact on the way that sellers sell. Am I right about that?
You're 100% right about it. The really, really fun and exciting thing, because I left a role, running marketing for a $6 billion division of a company. And then I stepped into a glorified senior IC role with no direct reports, only dotted line influence. And so it was like a super interesting dynamic. But the way that I approached category development was a holistic strategy. Who are we trying to sell to? What value are we bringing them? How do I help the team bring that conversation, have a really powerful discussion? So I was operating on research, marketing, selling, building net new partnerships, working with our product organization on like tweaks and analytics in particular that helped us be able to prove the value that we were doing. It really was a holistic approach to how do we refine the starting point of like tech companies liked LinkedIn marketing solutions.
Yep.
But it was really early days and they're like, we're not really sure why, and we're not really sure how to like harness the power of this. So you're going to be our category expert. You're who we were trying to sell to before, like, tech CMOs and others, like, help us figure it out. And so we absolutely looked at it as a holistic strategy that became, other functions being brought in as myself in that seat built out the holistic strategy. Then it was like, hey, bring marketing in, now bring our business development team in, now bring the sales team in, now bring in our research team, and like teach them how our go-to-market will help us. From back in the early days, it was, $20 million revenue stream, and now is a, nearly $1 billion revenue stream at LinkedIn.
Oh my goodness, not bad. So the common thread in both of these examples from CDW and from LinkedIn is a deep empathy with salespeople. And it's way easier said than done. And I think a lot of times marketers fall so in love with the cleverness of the phrases that they create, the language that they use, all those types of things. And to a certain extent, you want to be differentiated. You don't want to just say everything that everybody else is saying, but you want to use words and phrases that your sales team will actually say. Otherwise, what are you doing? How do you find that balance of being differentiated while also ensuring that the sales team is using the content, the messaging, the language that you create?
Yeah. I think in the early days, whether it was a marketer or my time at LinkedIn, that's formed how I approach it today is you have to feel comfortable with yourself going in the room and having that conversation. I think that was one of the things that I think made it a little bit easier for me to transition from marketing to sales, is that I grew up in field marketing. Like, I was living and working out of sales offices, doing regional events, and like, you were there. I was engaging and presenting to customers as much as the sales team. And so if I was using too much marketing speak, if I was using too much of that, like, theoretical conversations, you can just see customers and prospects glazing over in the eyes. And so this is one of the things that's really stuck with me is if you can actually Read this back as if you're in the room with a customer explaining this to them. And these words make sense, and these words are going to get their attention. Great. If you aren't comfortable, if I actually throw you into a room and have you present this to the customer, and all of a sudden you're completely changing your talk track, you're not comfortable saying some of these statements, great, we got to change it. Like, this has to resonate. Let's not try to be overly clever. Let's be plain and demonstrate value. Like, let's talk real. And that's actually going to get a better result. And so I think that's kind of one of those little sniff tests is like, hey, would you feel comfortable going in a room and presenting this way to a customer? If not, go back to the drawing board, rewrite it, figure out how to connect better with the audience.
100%. And it sounds so simple, but it's not. It's the simplest things oftentimes take the most effort. And obviously there's something to this, because you jump over to G2 in 2020, you have a record-setting 2021, you add over 1,000 customers, you raise $157 million at over $1 billion valuation. It's 150% year-over-year growth, I believe, something wild like that. Similar sort of success last year despite the economic headwinds. So I want to transition to those headwinds, to these uncertain times, call it a recession, call it a downturn, whatever. The verbiage doesn't really matter here. We know that the sales environment is getting more difficult. This is not your first foray in a difficult environment. Obviously, you worked through the great financial crisis. How do you think about the lessons that you learned in 2008 and translate them to today?
So for myself, I guess I'm semi-fortunate, right? I've joined the workforce coming out of the bubble bursting in the tech economy. Right. And I joined the workforce at a time when Enron happened.
Yep.
And so that was like a very formative experience for me, because Enron happened. There was an issue with one deal at the company that I was at that then everybody's like, oh, you're another Enron. And like, we lost 50% value in stock overnight and immediately had to go and figure out, like, how do you rebound from this? Right now, the company is in a different place now, acquired and a part of another organization, but like, that teaches you resilience. That teaches you to really think about your core. Like, what are we known for? How do we really focus on our core and make sure that we're protecting that core? Make sure that all of our customers, any prospect we're talking to, understands our core value, right? And so there's like that early day experience that then helped, as we went through the real estate burst and stuff in the U.S. economy. It ultimately does come down now, I think, on the back of COVID, current economic uncertainty, comes down to empathy. I think more than ever, both at a individual contributor level and at an exec level, like, this is so recent. We've gone through this in 2020. Now we're going through it again a couple years later, that you walk into it with way more understanding and way more focus on how do I help isolate as a company, where should I be most successful? What is the key thing that I have that can bring value to them? And how do I align my go-to-market to really focus there, to create opportunity and to create higher likelihood of success for my team who's on the front lines having those conversations every day?
That's right. And what's so interesting about this, Mike, is there are so much more now that marketers and sellers have at their disposal to collaborate with each other internally. As you've talked about, that collaboration between marketing and sales is critical, but also to collaborate with buyers and to really be able to put on their buyer's hat and understand what are they going through? What are they looking for? What can we do for them? So talk to us a little bit about, what do sellers and marketers have now that perhaps they didn't have 15, 20 years ago? And how do you leverage all these additional resources at your disposal?
Yeah, I mean, other than the empathy part, I think that data is the really huge differentiator. Data and technology that interoperates. If I think back to when I was a marketer, the things that we wanted to do in our go-to-market that we just couldn't because we didn't have the technology to do it, it was all manual. And I look at now, in the vantage point that I'm at from a G2 perspective, to be able to keep track of the category and the proliferation of categories with, the sales software category, like in 2019 was, it was around like 600-700 products, different product categories. It's now over like 2,000 different products. Wow. So, you're talking about not just like categories being created, volume of competition in those categories, and then you layer on top of that the MarTech environment of all the stuff that has to then connect to this, and that's like thousands of categories and products as well. Now we have like a gluttony of opportunities that didn't exist 15 years ago. And then 10 years ago, the proliferation started, but they still weren't working exceptionally well together.
Right.
And so now if you've got this great confluence happening of we are better than ever at capturing data, and more companies are creating data lakes. They're creating singular databases that help harness the power and analyze and create insights from all the different data sources, both first party as the company, like your CRM, transactional data, your website data, second party data, like a G2 of here's in market buyers, here's what they're looking at, this is what they care about right now, and all the great third party data sources that are out there that are, using other techniques, that are scouring the web, that are coming back to you and saying, here's additional points to triangulate on. Like, you have this data and more focused than ever on how do we really capture it and use it. And then you pair that with the technologies that actually make it easier to automate, analyze, and take action. It's actually a great time right now for people who have clarity of focus to be able to execute really well.
Love that. And I'm curious, as you mentioned this word automate, and it's a loaded term these days, and then one that I think is somewhat falling out of favor, Mike, because if you think about kind of the rise of your sales engagement platforms and marketing automation platforms, and it was all about scale. How do we pump out thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these emails or whatever it may be to all these unsuspecting prospects? And that got out of control. And obviously, that's not the buying experience that people want. And so now we're seeing somewhat of a correction, and automation is becoming something of not a dirty word necessarily, but people are thinking differently. So all of the data that you have, all the interoperable systems that you have, it requires now marketers and salespeople to not just, okay, they're in the market for a solution like ours, put them in the sequence and hit go. It requires extra effort to stand out in 2023. Do you agree with that? And what kind of extra effort are you seeing the best marketers and best reps put into their work?
Yes. 2023 especially, I mean, this has been there for the last few years as marketing automation software and stuff became very widely used. The downside of that is people just started spraying and praying and throwing messages around. I think the people that really differentiate are doing personalized communications now. You can't do this for everything, but the individuals of the dozen a day that I get in outreach of like, my product's amazing, we're going to help you so much.
Right.
The few people that I've ever replied to, it was a highly personalized message that was about me. Like personalized as in, hey, I've looked at G2, I understand what you are focused on, or at least from the outside, I believe I know what you're focused on. And here is an idea that we had of how we can help you with your go-to-market. And not generically, like, we're amazing, everybody loves us, but it was more of like, hey, you really care about software companies and this thing is going on in the market. And here's one way that we can help you better connect with your buyers. It's like, great, this is very well personalized. Now, there's technology now that helps folks to do this. There's a lot of testing going on with people using ChatGPT and all that stuff to help write this thing for me. So I think we're on the verge of like scaled personalization.
Right.
But up until this point, it's been the people that put the time and effort in to really show up differently. And that's more of like the one-to-one communications. I think on the marketing front, it is using the traditional firmographic data, some of the demographic data, but increasingly the amount of intent signals that we have to then create more of an understanding, not just demographically, firmographically, oh, you're an enterprise in this vertical, but it's like you're an enterprise in this vertical in the United States who right now cares a lot about this topic, and maybe even these companies who are providing solutions for that topic. How can I use that level of data and knowledge to do better outreach to you at scale via marketing programs? And it's just that context really grabs people's attentions and makes it worthwhile to say, yeah, I'd like to have a conversation. To me, it's credibility, right? Like that's what a sales rep always wants is got to walk out of this conversation and be seen as highly credible and worth putting your trust in.
It's very well said. Earning the credibility via the context that you provide, the research that you do, your ability to connect the dots between what you're selling and what actually matters to the person you're selling to. I remember actually, Mike, you mentioned the few outbound emails that you respond to. Somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, I actually read your press releases. And I know what your CEO, who's quoted in every one of your press releases, is focused on. You're focused on expanding internationally. You just opened up an office here. You hired 40 people in London. Here's how we can help." And I was like, whoa, you actually read it. And so it doesn't take a tremendous amount of effort. Like, this isn't something that's going to take you all day to research, but you put in the extra 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And if you can be that connective tissue that helps people see that you actually are trying to do something for them and not for you, makes a huge difference.
Yeah, agreed.
What's so interesting about this, Mike, is there is a pretty major difference between what your prospects or buyers will tell you versus what they will actually do, the research that they will do. And I've heard you speak in other forums where you're talking about how what the best reps are doing is they're always reading between the lines. They maintain a little bit of skepticism. They are aware that their buyers are not going to be 100% transparent with them. And it's not malicious. It's because maybe that buyer doesn't know everything that's going on at the account, what the entire buying group is motivated by. And so anyway, the best sellers know that they're getting incomplete information from one-to-one conversations with prospects. So how do you see the best sellers close that information gap and leverage that skepticism in a healthy way that moves deals forward?
Yeah, I think there's probably about three things that come top of mind for me. One is data.
Yeah.
Right? You need some of this data to help understand what's not being said. A very simple example can be you reach out to your contact and you're like, "Hey, I'm a security software vendor," and say, "Want to talk to you about security software. Oh, we're not in market. We're not interested right now." Okay, that could be the end of it. But if you know via data about in-market buying, it's like, "Oh, well, actually, I'm reaching out in a more personalized way. I'm reaching out because I understand that somebody in your San Francisco office right now is doing a lot of research around security software. And we would love to be able to share our thought leadership, talk about what your needs are, and help understand if this is going to be something that could be a solution for what you're currently exploring right now." Completely changes the tone. So using data to create more of that context we were talking about just before this, super important. So let's say maybe that gets you into the conversation. The second big differentiator of how do you close that gap is curiosity. This is a really big thing that we talk about within our team is if you have good domain expertise, like my team, I want them to be great at speaking marketing. I want them to understand what marketers think about, how they plan, how they budget, how they track ROI. You've got to be able to create a connection and really understand where they're coming from, because then the curiosity can come out, which is I'm going to ask really smart discovery questions. I'm going to try to bring value to the conversation that makes you want to give me more context and start filling in the gaps of what hasn't been said before, or what over time you're more willing to provide me. Because I think as that trust builds, because you're being curious, because you're trying to bring unique thoughts, unique ideas to the table, people will open up more versus just I'm giving you my standard qualification questions right now, which are 100% about me, 100% about getting my task done, nothing about you. You clam up and you're not going to open up to any of that. Then you walk out of that conversation, and the third one is you got to be skeptical, right? You leave that conversation, hopefully you feel good, you're setting the follow-up. You got to ask yourself, why wouldn't they proceed?
Yep.
Use that skepticism. What questions or concerns haven't I answered that if I were in their shoes would prevent me from moving forward? And this is where we can all drink the Kool-Aid of our companies, and we know, because we're so close to it. Sure. We know the value, we really believe in the value, and we know we can help. But you got to have that skepticism to say, why wouldn't they have this same belief? What haven't I done? What haven't I asked? What haven't I proven to them to kind of get beyond this wall, which is very fair. I mean, you and I probably are in a similar boats. You're getting prospected every single day with everybody that has the cure. And it's no, I don't think you do. But when people reach out highly personalized, when they ask great questions, when they bring value back to me to help me, not them, I give them a lot of information to help them out, to better help me out.
That's right. What's so interesting on that last point you made there, Mike, and this is a concept that it was made popular by the Challenger sale and doubled down on in the most recent book, The Jolt Effect. And a lot of sellers will be hesitant to bring up the unasked questions because they're like, oh, I don't want to insert doubt. I don't want to put myself in a bad position. I just don't want to entertain that conversation. But all of the data shows, all of the evidence shows that buyers really appreciate when you can anticipate their concerns, when you can help show them that you've been there before. You know what the buying process is like. You can help shepherd them through this process. You can help them overcome some of that indecision. So don't be afraid to bring up the common questions that other prospects are asking. You make your buyer feel better. You make them feel sane. You make them feel like they're thinking about the evaluation the right way, and it's a huge credibility builder.
I agree. I think there's an aspect that you're hitting on right now, which when you're sitting on the sales side, because you're across that table, you're across that video conference from them, you're just afraid of what's the follow-up question going to be sometimes, right? And so you don't know what you don't know, and so you're going to avoid the tougher questions, which is, it is understandable, right? Because we all hate sitting there and not having the answer. But that's the problem, is sales folks need to really be taught and given the psychological safety that it's okay, and we expect you're not going to have all the answers.
Yeah.
If you're on the other side of the table asking the question, to me, it's 100% acceptable for the person to say, I actually don't know the answer to that. Let me get back to you in 2 days once I've talked to my team or this expert within my company. It's like once you actually open that door for a salesperson to know it's okay not to know every answer, they become a lot more comfortable asking the questions and coming back and saying, this customer had an amazing question. I have no idea. Can we do this? Could we do this? Under what circumstances? And I think that creates and really empowers a lot of that curiosity that folks get scared of right now. And once they have the ability to know, I don't have to have all the answers, and it's okay for me to come back and say, can you help me find an answer? Then I think you get into way better conversations with your prospects and customers.
100% true, Mike. And it's funny because I operate the exact same way, which is no one at your company, I promise you, no one at your company knows every single thing end to end about your product, your go-to-market, your finance team, your operations, strategies. No one, not your CEO, not anybody. So why hold yourself to that standard? It's an impossible standard. Your job is not to have the answer to every question. It's to ask the right questions, and it's to know what you don't know. And the other thing about it is if somebody asks you a tough question that you don't know the answer to in a meeting, you say, hey, that is a wonderful question. I don't know the answer, but I know who does. I'm going to go track them down, get that answer. I'll follow back up. And guess what? You have a real reason to follow back up. You have a real reason for a next engagement, a next call, whatever it may be, to keep the conversation moving forward. So not only is it honest, and you're not lying to them, you're not blustering your way through a non-answer, you're also creating some sort of urgency or impetus, I should say, to continue the conversation at a later date. And that's what buyers want. They want that kind of transparency, and they want to be shepherded through the process. So it's really important that you can control the conversation, not necessarily by having every answer in real time, but by effectively responding to your prospects.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've all been on the other side, whether as consumers or as business professionals. And if we can just literally think about what are the things that I appreciate, that I like, that gets me to want to have a follow-up conversation, it's going to put you in a better place to be really effective at engaging with your customers and your prospects.
So you as a CRO, Mike, you have a really interesting position here where I believe a large part of your job is synthesizing all of these buyer questions, understanding where they're coming up in the sales cycle, and then creating some sort of governed process, others may call it a methodology, around the right way for your sellers to address these questions proactively. How do you think about creating that kind of governed process, rolling that out, and ensuring that your teams are actually, and your sellers are actually executing what they should be executing?
Yeah, to some degree, we fought using the traditional methodologies. I think that we have outlines of what does the ideal deal cycle look like? And at each stage, like, what should we know? What should we be proving to be able to have confidence to move this thing forward? Behind all of it, it starts for us within our overall kind of revenue enablement approach is like, one, I want to make sure that you're a master of G2. Like, I just want you to know the platform. I want you to know our buyer experience, not even like the customer side experience. Like, know, why do folks love coming to the G2 marketplace to engage, to learn, to make decisions about the software that they're going to purchase? Know that, because that's why customers love us. We connect the dots there, we're going to be in a good place. So know the G2 stuff. Now know our products. Then start teaching on the skills that put them in the right frame of mind, in the right skills, knowledge to be able to do the process itself. As the team's going through their process, we want to create moments for just coaching and accountability. Mm-hmm. Right? And so the coaching part of it is you're having regular one-on-one conversations, you're having regular pipeline discussions. Depending on the type of team and role you're in, we may do interactive sessions. Like, it's going to be like demo derby type thing where people are presenting on different client ideas that they're pitching to like learn from their peers. There's a little bit of discipline behind the scenes, and then there's process and accountability measures that are just helping people get really good at that process.
Yep.
That are getting good at the parts that we want them to do, which is, great discovery, great proposal and value development, really good negotiation capabilities, and then obviously close. But in each of those buckets, we try to put tools in place of like, here's some commonly asked questions, and let's talk in one-on-one. If you're, running into answers that you don't know how to respond to, okay, now you're in the proposal phase. Like, let me give you a structured discounting framework that helps you understand what the methodology is of like list price versus if a customer or a prospect is willing to do X, we can give Y.
Yep.
And I think that was one of the bigger things, right, as every startup goes through. When I joined, it was pretty unstructured, a lot of latitude. And now we're bringing a little bit of structure to the parts of the process that we find can be most beneficial to our business. And one of them is the discounting framework and just helping understand like, hey, we can't just, give a massive discount to everybody. Like, we have to really, really justify this is the value we're providing. Right. And that's why we can't give it away. That's why we do sell this at this price to everybody. Right. And I think that, those guidelines, that teaching, and then just the little conversation of like, all right, you've been through this, you're running into these challenges. Like, let me help coach you through it. Let me talk about how others are doing this. Let me talk to you about how I would answer this. And heck, I'll get on the call with you next time and we'll talk with the customer about it.
That's perfect. And it's such important guidance. And I think a lot of sellers and a lot of sales leaders, Mike, they have some aversion to this kind of process framework. And they say, I don't want to box my reps in. So much of the power of the sales rep is the autonomy that they have. And these things are not mutually exclusive. You can have process governance and you can have collaboration and autonomy at the same time. They're yin and yang. It's super, super important that you're providing some sort of framework and then allowing within that framework room to roam so that people can go and individualize and personalize and do the things that they need to do or that feel right to them in the moment. I want to zoom out a little bit and speak more on the leadership level for a moment, because you've mentioned all of these really important moments that you have across your what we think of as a revenue cadence. Your quarter is a 13-week cadence. Do you have prescribed days where you're taking certain actions, like forecast calls on Mondays, in-quarter deal inspection on Tuesday, out-quarter deal inspection on Wednesday? On Friday, we're going to do our late-stage deal inspection for this quarter. Do you have some sort of cadenced way that you're approaching the quarter?
Yeah. So we have a weekly forecasting process. We have a monthly, large opportunity update that goes to our senior leadership team. So every week we get in that rhythm of, we let the week start off, so you're going to have new insights. You're going to have email follow-ups from customers and prospects that come in. So it's like Monday, everybody's getting back into the rhythm. Tuesday, all of the ICs, all of the managers start talking about pipeline opportunities and getting their hands on how are things progressing, where are we seeing regression happen, to then start doing their forecast to the folks on my global CRO leadership team, so that on Wednesday, we sit down and as a global leadership team, just talk through how are things trending, what are we seeing, how can we help. And so that Wednesday then becomes me updating my forecast. We have access with our executive team, where they can log in 24/7 and see, like, okay, where's our most likely at? Where's the baseline commit at? Where's our best case scenario at for the quarter? And how is that trending? And, they have access to it. And so then once a month, we create a formal conversation amongst our senior leadership team, our executive staff, and have a discussion about, hey, here's some of the bigger things that are currently in the works right now that you're probably seeing in pipeline if you're checking it out. And, we'll talk about the broader trend of how the business is going to close for the month or the quarter. But we get into some of those like exciting, bigger opportunities. It's like, oh, hey, customer A, we've been having huge success with buyer intent. And now we're talking to 5 more divisions about it so that they can utilize this data to help themselves improve their demand generation engine, grow their pipeline, grow revenue overall. And so we want to have like that culture of open conversation about here's how we're trending, and give everybody the opportunity to raise their hand and say, oh, I can help. Here's how I can jump in. Because I think that's the one thing I absolutely love about, really the G2 culture and the people we have is everybody wants to help each other. Yep. Right? So you get into these conversations with our senior leadership team, and all of a sudden you have someone like Sarah Rossio, our chief product officer, raising her hand and being like, man, I want to jump on the call because the way they're thinking about using buyer intent, that's incredibly interesting. And I think we might be able to do something on the back end to like make this an easier execution for them, or give them different insights, give them some new analytics. And so having that culture of support and curiosity means like raising this isn't just about them pointing the finger at me and saying, why isn't the number higher? It's about how do we make this as good as possible? Right. And that, I think, is a great byproduct of having a process and bringing transparency to the data in that process, the forecast in that process, to make the whole company a part of us reaching our objectives together.
Such a great point, Mike. And what I loved the most about it is that as you were speaking, I was like, okay, he's going to start talking about his CFO or his CEO at some point here. But no, you said chief product officer. It's super, super interesting. We're finding more and more people inside of every company truly are revenue critical. They play an important, a critical role in generating revenue and contributing, as you said, collaboratively to the revenue process with the visibility, the transparency, the single pane of glass, whatever you want to call it, ensuring that people can actually see and inspect, people at every level, see and inspect what's going on, and then find ways to contribute is hyper critical. And one of the most critical areas, especially now, 2023, is with customer churn. And so I'm curious to hear how you're thinking about churn, and then kind of a secondary question, which is a lot of folks think about intent signals with respect to achieving acquisition, new logo acquisition. How can companies think about intent signals as a means of shoring up renewals, finding areas of expansion, cross-sell, upsell? Talk to us about that.
So obviously selfish perspective, but I believe based in reality of like, we love our buyer intent. Right? People are not just hanging out on G2 on a Friday night. They're there for a purpose.
Yep.
Like we know that, we build for it, we make it a really good buyer experience. And so if somebody's showing up in a signal, prospect or customer alike, we want to take that seriously. We want to learn from that and figure out what's the next best action that we should be doing based on this insight. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think most companies and the executive teams themselves, who can be highly engaged, should be understanding their customer experience as well, can look at these as use cases. Like the prospecting one, you're right. Most people are just dead set on that, won't belabor there. But when I think about it from a customer perspective, in these times where everybody's talking about growing from their customer base, intent signals, and really differentiating the type of intent signal and the action that should come from those is super important for your customers, because they give you a lot of context to be able to engage at the right time about the right product in our situation with buyer intent, and find the right team who cares about it. And I think the key thing for us, for our relationship managers, is intent signals are an opportunity to multi-thread, to build net new relationships, right? For a CSM, it is about protect the base.
Yep.
It's like, oh, we have hyper-specific buyer intent signals. If one of our key customers, or just customer in general, is searching for alternatives to us, is comparing us against our competition, that is a huge red flag that goes into our algorithms to say, this is an at-risk customer. And again, to psychological safety, is like, it's okay if you don't have it marked as at-risk right now. This data, the signal just showed up, which says, whoa, we may have a problem here. Let's go figure out how to prevent this churn from happening. Let's go figure out what we're not doing to help them.
That's right.
Right? And in some instances, it's a large enterprise. And so it's like, hey, we're working with 8 divisions here, but they got 15 more. It's somebody in one of those other divisions that we're not working with. Fantastic. Can you introduce us to the team that's looking at intent data right now? Like, we'd happily share our perspectives on it. We'll share our best practices. We'll share how we use it ourselves. But CSMs are a huge part of this, to say, all right, I've got an intent signal that just came to me of a customer of mine is researching all of our competitors right now. One, I got to flag this to my pod so my RM knows. We've got to brainstorm on like, okay, let's do outreach. You reach out to these folks, I'll reach out to these folks, and let's just get our arms around, do we have an at-risk customer, or do we actually have an expansion opportunity happening right here?
That's right. And what a good reframe too. And I love that, Mike. And what I'd hope is that you mentioned this and you alluded to this, that the same sort of thing here, it comes back to process. Not the most glamorous word in the world, but a super important one, which is you see the signal and there needs to be some sort of playbook that the team is equipped to go and run. If you just see the signal and you're like, okay, cool, next, you're not doing the job. So I love the comprehensiveness of the system that you are providing, and finding what could be a perceived threat. Oh, they're looking at other vendors, and flipping that into well, let's understand why. And perhaps there is an opportunity for expansion. Maybe they don't know that we also can do this set of capabilities that they are searching for. Let's go educate them. So love that reframe. Super valuable.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important to have the context and to take the right action. But what you said rings so true, is that the playbook has to be there, because a intent signal can and should be thought of as the new lead.
Right.
It's like, hey, this is an action that we need to follow up on. Just like the action before was, okay, you sent me this lead with a name and a number, and like, call them. Okay, cool. My playbook was, I'm going to call them and see what's up. So obviously that playbook didn't work all that well all the time. And typically, most stats would say that 80% of marketing leads kind of went untouched by sales. The same problem can happen with intent signals. But when you're using intent signals really well, and you have a playbook behind it, and the RM or CSM in this case understands what is the value of me taking the action, and then you're actually teaching them how to take that next action, it works exceptionally well. Our team uses our own intent signals and other data that we bring into our CRM system and other tools to activate against, to be very smart about what's the next best action that I can take. What customer, what prospect should I be prioritizing right now, and why, and what am I going to do with it?
Super smart. All right, my friend, we're going to wrap up. I have one last question for you, which is, as discussed, you've got the marketing background, you're in the sales role now. What is a book that you would recommend to sellers to generate empathy with marketers?
Yeah, it is not new, but I think it's such a classic that I continuously say, the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing.
Yep.
With Jack Trout and Al Ries. Like, it's a must read. Like, it is so relevant today. I mean, it talks about build a category, be known for something, differentiate. And a lot of folks from my sales teams over the years have asked, like, what should I read to get marketers better? I'm like, you got to start here. This is a classic. Like, know the basic principles of how marketers need to be thinking and operating, and you have a good foundation to go from there.
Lovely. How about flip side of the same coin, a book you'd recommend to marketers to generate that kind of empathy for sales?
Yeah, honestly, you mentioned it before, but something like the Challenger sale is just like understanding what a sales professional goes through. And unless you've done it, unless you've been on calls, unless you've had the pressure of a quota, you just don't really get it. But I think understanding things like the Challenger sale gets you in a little bit more of the frame of mind of like, oh, okay. Oh, so it's not as easy as just they're going to take the call, they're going to love what we do, and they're going to buy it. It's like there's a lot more to it. So Challenger sale is a good one that can open a few eyes about the difficulty and the nuance of how to be a successful salesperson.
Good stuff, Mike. So where can people go to find out more about you, find out more about G2? You mentioned you're launching a podcast here in the coming weeks. Very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we are launching as part of G2's Thought Leadership Series. I'm going to be hosting Go-to-Market Innovators. Very passionate around sales and marketing alignment as one of the core things that every organization has to do to be able to be successful, to create a really aligned go-to-market strategy. That is launching now. It'll be available via G2's blog. We'll be promoting that out across our social. So if you're not following G2 on LinkedIn, please do. And then you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and learn a little bit more about my background. And some of the articles I've written are posted on my profile.
Good stuff. And it is a gold mine for everybody out there. So please, please, please take him at this, take this offer and go and learn more about Mike, learn more about G2. Mike Weir, CRO of G2. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Kyle. Great conversation. Thank you all.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.